Hello and welcome to another late night talk. My guest this evening, this afternoon, whatever time you are, where you're in the world,
This morning.
this morning is Zack Argyle. Hi, Zack. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Nice to see
Excited to be
you.
here. Yeah.
Nice to see you virtually as opposed to in person. Because even though we
I
live
like
on
this
other sides of
better
the world,
because you're so tall. Virtual is great for me.
we look the same
I'm
height.
not as intimidated.
I didn't know that both you and your wife were amongst the little people until I met you. So,
I
it
would like to
was,
say I'm 5'10", which is not that short. My wife's 5'2". Now she is very short,
yeah.
but you're a giant.
It didn't help that you stood next to me and Ryan Cahill and
Yep.
like Justin Lee Anderson. It's just, yeah. Anyway,
Monsters.
basically, yeah. So we're here to talk about you and books and writing and stuff. But I want to go back to the beginning. Let's go back to your origin story. So what were you reading as a kid? What got you into genre, science fiction, fantasy, and maybe even outside of books? Because I keep forgetting to ask people like TV shows or video games, or what was your jam?
Yeah. So I didn't do a ton of reading growing up. I did go through a phase where I read a fair amount. My favorites were Redwall, that whole series. I loved that
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger. But when I was in like junior high and high school, I really didn't read much at all. Even like the stuff that was assigned in school, I often would just go on Spark Notes on the internet and like get the synopsis and write my reports, which is not good, obviously, but I kind
Don't do
of
this,
have
kids.
regrets.
Don't do
It's
this.
been it's been fun getting to read some of those things later on in life where I'm like, oh, I read The Giver when I was like 26 or something, which I was supposed to read when I was 15, and I was like, hey, this is actually pretty cool. I get it.
Yeah.
Um, no, I kind of just liked getting involved in everything, and so writing and reading weren't like top of mind or anything like that. I did
Mm,
weirdly like writing poetry, and so that was probably
interesting.
what I wrote more of. I've always enjoyed a more like terse format, which
Right.
is also why I've been enjoying writing short stories recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and one of my news stories has lots of music in it, and so I get to write some like poetry and songs in there. But I
Mm.
did do a bunch of songwriting. I played guitar and piano and drums, and so in college, I like was in some bands and did a bunch of acoustic stuff and wrote a bunch of music. I recorded some songs at a studio, which are not online anywhere, but maybe someday I'll share them. They're not bad. They're
Fair,
not bad.
fair. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I did enjoy like the idea of stories. And so when I got to college, actually my first year I was studying broadcast journalism.
Mm.
I wanted to be a TV anchorman, so like going down the
Nice.
reporter path. And then I realized that that's a horrible life. You have to
Okay.
be on call 24/7,
Oh, wow.
and it's like you got to, do that for 10 years before you have a chance at being a TV anchorman.
Mm.
And then the number of jobs for that obviously are very, very limited. So I switched and I went into engineering, which was a
That's
weird
quite a
switch.
pivot.
Yep, electrical and computer engineering. And so I had to go back and
Yeah.
take a bunch of math that I hadn't thought about in a long time.
Mm.
Um, but that was when I started getting back into reading. And so I
Okay.
met my wife while I was in college.
Hmm.
She has always been a big reader
Mm.
since she was young and never stopped. And what really kicked it off was I have a friend, his name's Brandon Williams, and one day we were just chatting. He was like, dude, I just finished this awesome book series. Do you want to read it? And I was like, well, I don't know, sure. Like my wife's been reading a bunch. Like I'll read with her, sure. And so he gave me a bootlegged PDF of this whole trilogy,
Okay.
and it
All right.
was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
And I freaking loved it, man. It was so good. I finished that trilogy and I was just like that the ending was so perfect and everything like came together in such an unexpected way. And I don't know if you can tell from the blurry backdrop, but we have spent a lot of money on Brandon Sanderson in
Hmm.
the years since then. And so we don't feel so bad about having originally read the bootleg PDF. Uh, but yeah, so that's kind of where me getting back into any reading or fantasy related things kind of really kicked off.
Did
And
you then
then,
sort of go like, wait, so is there more of this stuff and go backwards to some of the older stuff, or did you just carry on reading new stuff?
I mostly read newer stuff. because
Mm.
I just went to the bookstore and I was like, well, I
Hmm.
want some more stuff. And so like I went and found covers that I thought looked cool. So I read like The Warded Man by Peter Brett and then read
Yep.
that
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Demon Cycle,
Hmm.
which I had mixed opinions on, but really, really loved that first book.
So
And
good.
I read Lightbringer. So like a bunch of the or Lightbringer by Brent Weeks as opposed to
Yep.
the
Yeah,
new
yeah. The
Lightbringer single book.
Black Prism, I
Starts
think
with
is the
Black
first
Prism.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Really enjoyed those ones too. Um, but yeah, so it was kind of just like that's kind of what got me back into the world. And then obviously being in engineering, you just have to be a nerd. And so I was surrounded by nerds all the time and I fully embraced my nerddom after that. A couple years later, started playing Dungeons and Dragons with some friends,
Mm,
and then
good,
have
good.
been those like have become some of my best friends in the world, and we've been playing with them. Like we were living in California, and we have all since moved into different areas
Uh,
across the U.S. And we still talk, and we're actually starting up a new campaign like next week. So that's been
nice.
really fun. And that was the moment that really clicked for the writing. So I played Dungeons and Dragons as a player with some
Hmm.
people from work.
Yeah.
And then I really enjoyed it, and I wanted my wife to get into it and some of my friends, and so I started our own campaign where I was the DM,
Ah, okay.
and that's where it sucks you in, right? And so like obviously like whenever I mean I don't think there's like any readers in the world who don't have their own like ideas for a book. Like
Hmm.
everybody's got some ideas, and so like when I was reading, I had all these ideas, but it was when I became a dungeon master and I like started putting this story together for everything, and like I got everybody's backstories and started weaving them into the greater story throughout the campaign.
Mm.
There was like this moment in the campaign that was probably like I don't know 9 months into it where this reveal happened and like everyone at the table gasped out loud. And it was something that I'd been planning for so long, and I was like, it worked. And like
Yes.
that was the moment where I was like, hey, I could do this. I can tell a long form story
Hmm.
with interweaving stories like within it and have it actually land. And so that was kind of like the moment where I was like, you know what, I'm going to try writing that book I was thinking about. And that's when I first started writing the Threadlight series. Yeah.
The weird thing is when you play when you are a DM and you're doing it with people, you never quite know what they're going to do. You think you're kind of trying to guide them down a path, and sometimes they go off, and you're like, oh god damn, and you have to kind of bend them back into the thing. Thankfully, with characters, usually it's a lot easier. But I've found that sometimes some of the great stories come out, and then when you try and thinking, if I could write that in a story, and I'm like, that's just unbelievable. People would not believe that would happen in a story. They'd be like, no one would actually do that. But a player's like,
No,
yeah,
absolutely
I'm
not.
not going to go through the door. I'm going to go through the window. And you're like, why? The door is right. No, it's probably a trap. And you're thinking, oh, come on. This is ridiculous. But people are
I did
nightmare.
feel bad. There was one session where something that I had been planning for a long time that I knew would land really well, and I kind of forced it on them because they like tried to go down a different path.
No.
Like I needed them to kill these people, and they had always killed everybody up until this point. But in that moment, they decided not to kill these people, and I was like,
Come
"No, I need you
on.
to kill them." Because secretly they had like traveled to the past, and the people that this group they got split up, and this group was gonna kill the parents of someone over in the other group. And I was like, "This is gonna be so awesome!" when they realized that they killed them, but then they like wouldn't kill them, and I was like, no, you need you need to kill those people because it's going to be awesome. So anyway, yeah. Sometimes we still railroad our players every once in a while for
Yeah.
glorious impact.
I find it tiring though. I find it uses the same muscles as writing. So I'm in two groups and
Yeah.
I'm just a player now. So I enjoy being an arse and not being anything like me as the character and just causing havoc, quite frankly.
That sounds not too much far from you.
Shush. It's internet. No one knows who you actually are. It's all fake. Yeah, but I've great fun doing that. But yeah, when I was a DM, I found it was using a lot of the same kind of writing muscles, and it's just quite tiring. So I'm happy to be a player
Yeah,
now. Um,
same.
so I have done my research, and I believe that Voice of War. Hey, look, here's a copy I have already. Look at
Whoa,
that,
look
book
at
one. I said like Zack Argyle. This was the first novel that you actually wrote that you started writing down.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. Why this book and why this story?
Yeah, well, I it basically started out kind of with the idea of, I became a dad, and I was like, man, how cool would it be if your kid was the chosen one? And then I was like, well, the chosen one's never a baby, but like when they're a baby, they're still the chosen one at that point, right? It doesn't like click later on. They're always kind of like destined for it. I was like, what if you found out that the kid was the chosen one when they were a baby, but other people knew also? And so that's kind of where it started from.
Right.
And I was like, well, I want to have some parents in there and
Hmm.
have like be their point of view trying to protect their kid who they think is going to be vital to saving the world. And the first draft of the story was quite different than what it turned into at the end.
Did you plan it?
I
Did you plan the story, or were you just like writing as you went?
I did, yeah. I planned it, and I obviously, like I said, I'd written a bunch of like poetry and short things, but I'd never written anything long.
Yeah.
And so I wrote it and I shared it with that same guy, Brandon Williams. I shared it with my wife and a couple other people. Um, it was actually really nice. I finished the story and then I posted on Facebook and I was like, "Hey, I wrote a book. Like, would anybody be willing to give me some feedback on it?" And I had 40 people respond to it on Facebook from
Wow.
like just like friends and like family from like over the years, like people I hadn't like talked to for a long time. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." So I chose 10 of them who I thought would be like a good, well-rounded group to give feedback.
Yeah.
And they gave some great feedback. And yeah, it ended up there was things that needed to be done to make
Mm.
the story better. And so I went back and kind of rewrote it pretty wholesale. And it turned out a lot better. But that's kind of how it started and evolved. And yeah.
So I've read as well that obviously the book contains, as you said, a lot of mothers and fathers, a lot of parents. Do you think you could have written this story before you became a father, like 10 years
No,
ago?
parts of it I could have written, but there are definitely parts that I could not have.
Mm.
Like there's a chapter in the second book early on, from the point of view of the main character's wife, and she's going through postpartum depression. And like I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't care about that. But then
Mm.
like once you've had kids and like and your friends have kids and you start like learning about these things, you're like, oh man, this is like, yeah, she had a baby and now they're like on the run from like these like forces that like want to kill their baby. And I'm like, that sucks. Like she's gonna be going through some stuff. And so I was like, I want to make sure that gets represented. And I for sure would not have ever thought of that beforehand.
Yeah, yeah. I it's for some authors that have, really long careers, and you look back and say, like, Stephen King's of this world, 40 years in the business. You look about what he was writing about then, and then you filter it through the lens of what we know about his biography compared to what he's writing about now. And it's a fascinating exploration of story through the lens of the person, which I find really interesting. Like
Yeah.
what I'm writing now compared to what I wrote 10 years ago, I'm thinking I couldn't have written some of those stories. I didn't have the voice. I wasn't mature enough. I wasn't thinking about those things at all. Like it
Yeah.
just wouldn't come up in, day-to-day thoughts. It just didn't factor.
Or if you did, it wouldn't have had the same impact that you can have now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can
That's cool.
speak with more authority on things, having lived through it, or people who've lived through it in your circle of friends, and you have to
Yeah,
kind of
all those wars that you've lived through, like now you can write them firsthand.
yeah, sure. Although someone did write to me and say,
All those fist fights.
where did you serve? And I was like, I didn't. But they're like, oh, like, because the PTSD stuff seems really, really well done. I'm like,
Oh,
I'll take that as the highest compliment from someone. So,
that's awesome. Yeah.
that kind of stuff,
Love
you're
that.
like, I've done my job well if someone believes this. So I said, yeah,
That's awesome.
Vietnam. I was in Nam for, and then the Korean War, Gulf War. Yeah, all of them. I did all of them. Yeah.
World War II, I was there too, you know.
I traveled
Don't
back in
ask how.
time, and then Marty McFly it. So that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So you finish Voice of War, you get feedback. What happens next?
Uh, then I did another round of feedback. And it went much better that time. And so then basically that was around December of 2022, I think, when I finally got that last bit of feedback.
Right.
And I did actually send out some queries originally. I
I
didn't like
wondered.
wait I didn't wait long and I didn't really push it much because I never really intended for this to be a career or anything, or
Yeah.
really for people to read it. I just did it for fun. Um, And then COVID hit, and I was like, well, I should just get this thing out right now. And so I pushed up the publish date, and I published it in March of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not a good time to publish a book, but again, like I
Of all
wasn't
the
trying to make this a
times.
career. So my friend, and I also, so here's a good self-publishing tip.
Mm,
So I published Voice of War. First off, I published it with a different cover, it was not on genre. And the only people who bought it that first day were friends and family. I think I sold like 30 or 40 copies. I was like super stoked about it. Great. The problem with that is that is horrible for your book to do.
right. Why?
And this is something that a lot of people don't think about, is that Amazon trains their algorithm based on who is buying your book.
Mhm.
And so if all of your friends and family are buying your book and they don't normally read fantasy or the genre that you read, then you are training Amazon to not give your book to the people that you want them to show it to.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just immediately tanks your propagation throughout the Amazon algorithm.
Right.
So don't
Right.
do that.
Okay.
In like, if you want your friends to support you, like have them like buy direct through you or something, right?
Yeah.
You want, unless they're like avid fantasy readers, then like definitely have them do that. So anyway, yeah, I published in March of 2020, sold that, and then didn't really sell any books the rest of the month. And really what happened is I decided I wanted to, well, I always wanted to finish the trilogy, and I was like, well, I
Yeah.
need to hold myself accountable. And
Okay.
so a friend of mine shared about an indie publishing Facebook group called 20 Books to 50K, which you may have heard of. It's like the biggest indie publishing group in the world. And like the premise being, if you write 20 books, you can make 50K a year on royalties, which
Right.
is such like a self-publishing thing to say, right? Just write 20 books. No big deal.
Just bang them
And
out.
you can have a career.
Just bang them out.
Luckily, like that group has shifted quite a bit, and that's like not really what people focus on anymore, which is nice.
Mm.
But anyway, so I joined that group, and I saw a post from somebody saying, hey, I'm putting together a fantasy writing group, and I want it to be people who are serious, and I want it to be people who want to make writing a career. And I messaged him, and I was like, that's not me. But I'd still love to join the group if you'd like, because they were like, he's like, I write epic fantasy, epic dark fantasy, like when I get similar people. And so he was like, oh, it sounds fine. I've been with that writing group ever since. We meet every week, and they have all published way more books than I have, because they're, trying to make careers out of
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
more than I am. But that is kind of what kicked off like the becoming a little bit more serious about the writing.
Right. They
And
kept you
then
accountable.
Yeah, and then as part of that, I heard about this competition called SPFBO that Mark Lawrence puts on, that I
Yeah.
had no idea what it was. And the guys in my writing group also didn't know what it was. And I was like, hey, like we should submit to this thing.
Mm.
And they were like, sure. And then we all submitted, and somehow I became a finalist, which was wildly, unexpected.
Hmm.
Lynn Williams was the blogger that selected my book, and I think she had two or three books that, like what it sounded like, two or three books that she was kind of leaning on, trying to decide which one she wanted to choose.
Mm.
And one of them had been previously traditionally published and had like a career of writing. And then another one was a pretty popular indie published, like an indie author.
Mm.
And then there was me that like no one had ever heard of. My like Voice of War had like 15 ratings on Goodreads at the time or something like that. And I think she chose me because she was like, well, let's give the new guy a shot. If I like them all equally, let's give it to this guy. And I love her immensely for doing that. I am sending her a copy of my special edition omnibus, just
Nice.
as a thank you. So I'm excited for her to get that. But then that's really when it started to become even more serious, right? I was like, okay, I became serious about the writing with the writing group.
Yeah.
But then the career became more serious when I was like, hold on, like people actually like this. And I don't know, I kind of stumbled into the career of it just based on a couple people finding the books really interesting. And so that was pretty cool.
It's really lucky as well on your first book as well that it hit a chord with people. But
Yeah.
I think like you said, if you'd written a book 10 years ago, it may not have had the same echoes, whereas because the themes in that book
No.
are universal for people of all ages, but especially those who have families and who are a little bit older. So maybe that's what resonated with readers as much
Oh
as the
yeah.
fantasy elements, you know?
There's a scene in Voice of War where so the main character Chris, he's becoming a dad. He's married to this woman for about 5 years. He has a lot of pressure from everybody to be, this guy that they think he is, and he doesn't think he's that. And he doesn't like want to tell his wife about his struggles. And that's like, I wouldn't have thought about that when I was like 18 years old. Like, I don't know. Like, who cares? But like, I'm married. I have now been married for 13 years. And I'm like, yeah, I feel that as a dad and as a husband and as like, part of a family. Like, I feel like I need to be the rock, right? Like, don't let them
Mm-hmm.
see what's going on. So there's this scene where he finally opens up to his wife and like he's just stressed out of his mind about telling her. And then she just stops and is quiet. And she's finally just like, that must be so hard, like not sharing that for so long. And I was like, I still like it makes me happy just like thinking about that moment because I think it's such like a sweet moment between two people that I definitely could not have written before.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a very blokish thing to do, not talk about your feelings. And in England, it's very, stiff upper lip and you
Yeah.
don't show your feelings and do this. And, it's so common for men not to talk about their feelings, their emotions, and to shoulder things. And, I've got a whole thing about mental health and stuff. That's one of my kind of like things that I champion because it's so important that we talk about these things because um to get serious for a minute, men under 40 have some of the highest suicide rates in some countries because they don't open up and they don't, because we're not taught how to do any of these things. We're kind of molded by various elements, and yeah.
Suck it up. Figure it out yourself. Solve the problem.
Be a
Like,
man, don't be a wuss, don't be a girl, sort it out, toughen up, all these things that we're
yeah.
kind of hammered over and over and over again, and it causes so many problems. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely universal themes that I think echoed, and rightly so, with readers. I'm pleased that they found the audience. And now, of course, you've finished the trilogy, and I know you've just done the Kickstarter very successfully for the omnibus. Super shiny, very, very sparkly cover. It looks amazing. I saw it and just thought, that looks so good. Looks so, so
It
good.
honestly, it turned out just exactly how I imagined
Yeah.
in like the best way. And oh my gosh, it's you can see the blurry
Hmm.
slipcase over there, but it's I'm so happy with it. Like, and people will probably have received it by the time this video comes out because
Amazing.
they're all shipping this week.
Excellent.
And yeah, it makes me so happy.
So I know that you're obviously a keen supporter of indie press and indie publishing. Can you talk a bit about the indie fantasy fund and what it is and where it started from and what it does?
Oh yeah, so I mean, again, this kind of ties into the fact like I never expected this to be a career.
Hmm.
And so when I stumbled into all of a sudden making some money from it, that was like kind of surprising. And I was like, well, I don't, I'm fortunate enough that like my day job is very good and I don't need the money from writing. And I'm also fortunate enough to like have all of the upfront funds that you need to like self-publish like well,
Yeah.
right? Like it costs a lot of money to go through editors, to go through commissioning like actual good art. I mean,
Yes.
you can get a cover for 10, $50, but it looks like a self-published cover and that's not what you want. I mean, look at your covers sitting over your shoulder, man. Your covers are so good.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, um, audiobooks are so expensive to get
Oh
done,
yeah, yeah.
and it's so hard for people to justify that cost with like, the wishy-washy. Will I actually make any money from this? Because there's a lot of people who actually really don't.
Mm.
Like I know people who have really long 350,000 word books, and they get it narrated, and it costs them like $10,000 with a good narrator, and then
Yeah.
they don't make it back. And
No.
it's like, well, it's cool that like you did that, but like if you don't make it back, that kind of sucks.
Mm.
So the Indie Fantasy Fund was my wife and I saying, hey, like what if we try to give back to the community and help people in ways that they, you know, my wife and I feel guilty all the time for
Why?
I I grew up in like not a super nice area,
Mhm.
and we now live in a very nice area, and so we just feel very blessed, and sometimes guilty for what we have, and
But you
so
worked for it. You shouldn't. You've worked hard for it. It's,
everyone works hard, man. I don't work harder than people who are making way less money than me.
yeah, but you're
I don't
not
know.
coasting either. You worked hard for it, so you shouldn't feel
Yeah,
guilty. But anyway, so the fund
I
is
know.
there to help people.
We like to give back, and
Yeah,
we have always that's always been kind of like a pillar of our relationship. And so once we were both in the book community, for those who don't know, my wife is Bookborn, the YouTuber.
yeah.
We both just wanted to give back to people, and we thought this would be a great way where we're like, hey, especially after doing the audiobooks for my series,
Mm,
it cost me about $10,000 for the whole trilogy, and I was just like, that's insane. And like,
yeah.
fortunately, like I've made it back and everything now, so like it's not a big deal. But like after the first two were done, I had probably made like, I don't know, $1,500 from the audiobooks, and I had
Mm,
spent $6,000 or a little bit more than that.
yeah.
And so I was like, I mean, I want to keep going because I know that there's some like indie publishing things that you can do once you have the whole series. It's very popular to do box sets on audio, and those are
Mm,
very popular on Audible because people like length. And so if you can give them 40 plus hours of audio for a single credit, they're very happy to do that.
mm.
Um, like I know I'm getting slightly distracted, but like Michael R. Miller, who
Yes,
is a
Michael.
very, very popular indie author, I know,
Hmm.
and he does very, very well, especially on audio. His his success didn't take off until he had his box set on audio, and that completely shifted his career and just like took off. And his audio sales are insane. But anyway, so like that's kind of where the Indie Fantasy Fund started. It's officially a nonprofit now. We did register it as a 501c3 in the U.S.
Yep.
Um, and so we basically just give cash grants to authors to help in their publishing process. We have them
Yeah.
submit 10 pages of the book that they're wanting to use the money for, and then a little snippet of like what they want to use the money for. And then we go through and we decide what we want to do. Last year we did accept cash donations for the first time. So we got an extra about $5,000 from people that were donated from the community, which was pretty
That's
cool.
fantastic. Yeah.
We had $10,000 grants that we did. This year, we're actually going to announce soon that we're doing it a little bit different. We're going to focus on audio this year, and
Mm,
so we're hoping to give larger grants to a fewer number of people
right.
because, frankly, like $1,000, it's helpful. It's very helpful, but it's not that helpful.
Yeah.
And so we're like, it would be a lot more helpful if we could give 2 or 3 thousand to a single person, and do that for 4 people or something, 4 or 5 people.
Mm.
So that's probably going to be the focus this year. We're still ironing out details. But yeah, that's the Indie Fantasy Fund right there.
And I think that ties in quite nicely to your audio book channel that you have on YouTube, which is quite interesting. And I know you had some difficulty setting it up as well because they kept saying, "Oh, it's like pirated content." So can you explain to people what it is? Because I know about it. And when originally it came up, I thought
Yeah,
that's going to be some roadblocks straight away to set that going.
yeah. It was a weird idea. So I had heard that there was some indie authors who have been putting their backlist, like their older books, up
Yep.
on YouTube, and then monetizing with ads. Right? Like, and the nice thing is like if you got a 12-hour video, you put in an ad every 30 minutes. It's not super distracting, and then you get 12 to 20 ads per video for a single listen, which is at the end of the day not enough money to justify it, frankly.
Right.
For like a single listen, like you do not make very much money from 12 to 20 ads.
Yeah.
But I was like, hey, again, this was like me being like, I don't need the money from what I'm making as a writer, so I want to try new things.
Yeah.
And my current kind of plan of attack is I just want my books to get out there,
Mm.
right? Like I don't want to do it in a way that's like I just give it away for free, period, everywhere. Um, but I do want to make them widely available as much as I can.
Yeah.
Like now that I'm like writing a new series and like working on some other books, I'm like, I would love for people just to know who I am,
Hmm.
right? And
Mm.
so this was like one of those ideas where it's like this is a very wide play. And I was also like, I only have 3 books, and so I'm not going to make a YouTube channel and put 3 videos on it and expect people to subscribe.
Yes.
And so at the time I was at, so that 20 books to 50K Facebook group, they have a conference every year. And so in 2022, I was at their conference is called 20 Books. I think it just changed names actually this year to something else, but it's in Las Vegas. And so I was there. I chatted with an author named Richard Fierce, who has his audiobooks on YouTube. His books are all pretty short, so his audio is like 4 to 5 hours each. And he was finding like some great success. And he was like, this, yeah, unexpected, but it's like it's working pretty well. And I was like, oh, cool. And so then I was like, okay, well, I need people to do this with me. And that's kind of where the idea for the channel came from. I was like, well, what if it was like a collective? I got like, like other indie authors. And I was like, ideally ones that have like a fair number of books. And so the first person I talked to was Jeffrey L. Kohanek. And so he's a pretty popular, very he writes a lot.
Right.
And so he writes these books called the Wizardums. And so he's got a couple of different series in this Wizardom world, and very classic fantasy, like, get your group together, go on an adventure, different kinds, like styles of that. But he's got multiple finished series that are like, 6 books long.
Right.
And
Okay.
so he was at the conference and I had become friends with him, and I was like, hey man, I have a pitch for you. And I was like, what do you think about doing this with like one of your series, and we see how it goes? And his books are narrated by Travis Baldree. And so
Oh,
I was like, I know,
fantastic.
and I was like, I know my narrator's good. I know his narrator's good. Like, I don't want to put up audiobooks that are just like, bad quality or anything.
Mm.
And he was like, that's kind of a cool idea. Let's talk about it. And so I actually, like, while I was at the conference, I started the channel, like on YouTube. I created the channel.
Right.
I created like the avatar and the header and everything while I was there, like at nighttime, just hacking away on Photoshop. And I started messaging indie authors that I knew had their audiobooks wide. Right,
Right.
because that's the requirement, because most indie authors have their audiobooks exclusive to Audible because you get the higher royalty. And so yeah, I had to find some of those people. I found a couple other SPFBO finalists
Right.
that I had known. I knew their books were good. And then yeah, we launched the channel, and we launched it with an announcement from Petrick Leo, and we got over 1,000 subscribers instantly.
Wow.
Like as soon like the day that it launched. And then the next day YouTube took the channel down. Because we launched with 6 audiobooks already on there, the first book in 6 different series.
Yep.
For the 6 authors that we had together. And so the channel, yeah, got immediately taken down, and I had to scramble to get it back because they were like, this is copyrighted material. And I was like, yeah, but it's ours. And
We
so
want it out there. It's not
yeah.
stealing it from
And I
anybody.
actually I had foreseen this happening. And so
Right.
every video has a link in the description that links out to the author's author site.
Yeah.
And it's a specific page, and it says the Epic Fantasy Audiobooks YouTube channel has my permission to use the audio on this channel. So
Right.
it was like our DMCA page.
Yep.
And so I was able to point to that. It did not get approved. I did my appeal, and it got denied. And I was like, no. But I have friends that work at YouTube. I'm a software engineer.
Right.
I
Okay.
work for Instagram. I have friends that work at Google. And so I reached out to some of them, and they were able to help me get it resolved, and the channel came back up.
That was very
Which is,
fortunate to know the right people to get it done.
that's like one of the things that I keep saying. Like that's why sometimes I feel guilty. I'm like, the resources that I have to try out some of these things, like other people don't have. And so that's why I try to get back. Anyway. So we got the channel back. It grew. We passed the monetization requirements, enabled ads, and it got denied. And I was just like, what the heck? And so it took like 2 weeks, and it finally got approved. And then like a month later, the channel got taken down again.
Oh.
And I was like, what is happening? Stop it. And so my friends helped me get it resolved again.
Okay.
And then
so it's going now again. It's running.
It's running, and it has been running smoothly ever since. Fortunately, we are, I think, about almost 19,000 subscribers now. So it's, in less than a year, which is pretty cool. And we've got like almost 3 million hours of watched video
Wow,
because
that's
the
amazing.
videos are 12 hours long sometimes, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course, of
So
course. So it's
that's
another stream of income that's generating ad revenue for all of the authors on there for their audiobooks
yeah.
because
So
you're
we've generated
non-exclusive.
over $20,000
Yeah.
for the from the channel, and yeah, every month I put out a report of like the metrics, and then every quarter I do payouts to all the authors,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's been pretty cool. We have like one of our videos now has like 250,000 views on it. Like it's going better than expected. I mean, it's been great, like kind of building the community, and people seem to like the channel. So, well, I mean, it's free audiobook, so of course they do.
Well,
But
this is it. Normally, if an audiobook's on there and it's not supposed to be, it will get pulled because the author's losing money. But in this case, it's on purpose. So have you put all of the Threadlight books or just the first one on
all
there?
three are up there. Yep.
Oh, okay. I thought it'd be like the first book, and then if you want books 2 and 3, you go buy them from, somewhere.
The cool thing is that none of us have seen any impact on our wider audio sales.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
it seems to work. We're probably going to add a couple more authors this year, but it's like a hard sell because people are like so confused by the idea of doing it.
Hmm.
So, and I want to make sure we do have like a lot of people interested, more than we can, add. And so
Yeah.
I've got to try to figure out the right people at the right time to add and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, because some people just don't use YouTube and it's not their thing and they're not aware of it. They wouldn't even think to go and look for it, whereas other people, it's their first port of call, and it's as you said, it's getting your name out in as many places as possible to get
Most
known, I
most of the
think.
people do this like during their day job. They just like put
Mm.
on the audiobooks during their day. Like so many
Oh
people are like,
yeah.
"Hey, I work construction and this channel is so awesome because I like have all these audiobooks I can listen to while I'm working." And I'm like, "That's so cool." Or like, oh, "I'm a truck driver, like I listen to this channel all the time." I'm like, I
Friends
love
of
that. That's
mine,
awesome.
a couple of friends, a couple of people I know, like Brian Hitch, who's a comic book creator from like past 35 years or something. He just listens to audiobooks all day, every day, whilst he's working at the board. Like this guy, worked on the Avengers and stuff. He created some of the early stuff. Like
Nice.
the only reason Samuel L. Jackson is in the Avengers film is because of Brian Hitch. He did Ultimates and he based it on Samuel L. Jackson as a Black Nick Fury. So
That is
Brian
awesome.
messages me every now and then on Twitter and is like, "What book should I read? Give me some long series." And I give him, then he just sits there and he'll just like burn through them and then be like, "Right, what's next?" And he'll just burn through the next like 20 books and on audio because he's there 8-10 hours a
Yeah.
day drawing, and he's just got so he takes in stories
Such a
and
great way to like spark the creativity while he's doing it, I bet too.
the guy's an absolute legend. But yeah, people like that, as you say, in truck drivers are like, I've got 12 hours on the road, I need an audio book and like just plow through it.
Yeah.
So you've gone through all of this and not thinking about the resources that you have, the access that you said that other people don't. But I know you're working on a new series, and I know you've done like a story in the Advent of Winter anthology. But as you said, you're working on something new. So what key lessons have you learned from self-publishing, from doing this first round of books that you're going to take forward into the next one? Because obviously I'm going to dabble in self-publishing probably later this year, but I'm not setting a hard deadline like you did, because I remember you saying like, well, now I've got a race to get it out, and now I can push it back once, and after that I have to get it out then. So what lessons
Yep.
have you learned for the next time?
Yeah, don't set far out pre-order
That's the
dates
first thing. Don't set a hard deadline
before
until
you
you're ready.
before you're like, far in the book at least.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I mean I've learned a ton. Like the algorithm one I think is a huge one. And that's one that like
Hmm.
I'm not even gonna post on my Facebook page the day that it like my new books are out.
Right.
Like I'm not. Like I will post in my newsletter because those are people who, hopefully are already like reading my books.
Yeah.
And like the Twitter sphere that I'm in, all fantasy readers, right?
Hmm.
Um, Also, like the newsletter thing is huge, and that's something that I had no idea about originally.
Mm.
Um, it's and I think something that a lot of traditionally published authors don't really consider much, right? Because they have their marketing arm from their publisher, and that's the way that they reach people.
Yeah.
But indie authors, and I think a lot of traditionally published authors as well now, have newsletters because that is like if I have your email, I can talk to you, right? And like that's what you want. You need to be able to tell people things, and social media is not reliable. right?
No, less so these
having
days.
an algorithm to tell people about an announcement is not reliable because you don't know if it's going to get out there. Whereas
Mm.
like if I can send you an email, I know that you're going to get it, and so you're going to at least know that it's something has been published.
Yeah.
And so yeah, growing a newsletter is important, but then also newsletter swaps are something that like I had no idea about originally.
Right.
And so this is something that a lot of indie authors do where I mean, I have like a couple of people that I have committed to swapping with for my next newsletter where like, they're like, hey, do you want to, share my release and then I'll share something for you. And I'm like, hey, like, I don't have anything to share right now, but like, I'll share yours and then I'll have an IOU for you later down the
Yep.
road.
Yep.
And so like, I've got like a list of like 6 people already that like have IOUs for me that once I'm ready to release, like they'll share in their newsletter that like I have a release.
Nice.
And so like I do the same. Like I have my newsletter and then at the bottom, like a recommendation section where I talk about like either some like books that are on sale or some book releases and that. So that's helpful. So just like the marketing side there. There's also weird things in indie publishing where like the length of your book actually does matter quite a bit in different ways.
Okay.
Right. So like, for example, both on ebook and audio. And I think this is like one of the big differences, right? Is like traditional publishing is so focused on paperbacks that it's very different than focusing on ebook in like the digital world.
Yes.
And so, especially once you get like Kindle Unlimited involved on Amazon, the length of your book is directly proportional to how much money you make when somebody
Yes.
reads your book on Kindle
Pages
Unlimited.
read count towards the cost.
You're paid
Payment
for the number of pages read. And then on audio, if your book is not long enough, people don't want to spend an Audible credit on it.
Yeah.
So like there are clear benefits to writing long books if you are an indie author, because digital is where you make your money. And so your Kindle Unlimited and your like I have, I don't know, 2.5 million KU page reads or something. But like if I right, and that's certain number of books like read throughs that people have done of the books.
Yeah.
It's probably like 15,000 or something. I don't know for like the length of my books. And if my books were instead of like 370 pages, if they were 500 pages,
Yeah.
then that same 15,000 read throughs would be 4 million page reads, and my income would be that much higher. And so it's like this weird thing where like I don't want to write terse short books. I want to make sure that the books are more expansive because there are like monetary benefits to it. I don't want to
Yeah.
like add like fluff in there, but like I mentioned, I like terse writing.
Yeah.
And so like that's why all my books are like under 400
Yeah.
pages.
This is like
Even though they're epic fantasy, right? Like it's weird. Like that's not like
Yeah.
epic fantasy length. And there's some people who don't like it because like, you don't get as much world building, you don't get as much character development in every single book, but like in the grand scheme of the series, you get it all.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, okay, well, my new book, I want to, instead of shooting for 100,000 words, I want to do like 150,000. Right?
Yep.
And I want to get like, I want it to be a little bit meatier. I can work with that. And then there's like all these other side benefits that come with it. So I think that's kind of a weird indie thing that I don't know, some people play with for sure when they're writing like 400,000 word books.
Ryan Cahill. Yeah, we're looking at you. It's true though that so it's physical. So large publishers and medium publishers in traditional space are focused on bookshops and selling through bookshops. Obviously, they sell through Amazon. Obviously, it's probably still their biggest outlet, but it's for physical books. Ebook and audiobooks are in there, and that's all taken care of. But obviously, they're feeding the bookshops who sell the books. And so a shorter book in a standalone is probably an easier sell because of the physical cost of it, the shipping of the cost, the warehousing, the storage, the returns, all of that. Whereas from your perspective as an indie author, it's print on demand. You're not paying for warehousing and storage. And the cost per unit, obviously for a paperback, might be like £18 or $20, which is a lot more than you would pay if it was traditional. But equally, someone be like, do I really want to pay $20 or should I pay $8 and get the ebook and I've got the same story? And so I think I've said this before, my kind of split is weird. My sales are roughly 40% ebook, 40% paperback, and 20% audio. Not always, but that's kind of the rough
Because your books aren't
breakdown.
long enough.
But like, and also the
Get
longer
more
the
audio
series,
sales.
the longer the series, the steady decline you get off in traditional space. But it's the complete opposite of that in indie, which is so weird to get my brain around.
It is weird. Yeah. I
So
don't, yeah.
you wrote a trilogy, and were people are like, "Where's book 4, 5, and 6?" Were they like, "Where's the
Oh yeah,
next?"
people would love more, but it is a very definitive ending, and I wanted to be done with it and move on
Mm.
to something new. So, but yeah, people, if I wanted to write, 6, 10 books, people would love it. Yeah.
It's just
And
so
I could
weird.
force it, but I just don't
Yeah.
want to.
No, but it's just so weird that a longer series works better in the indie space than a shorter series.
It's binging, right? Like the indie sphere is a lot about binging.
Mm.
And it's because it's digital, right? Like you can't binge physical books, but I can binge ebooks because I finished the book, and then at the end of the book on my little like Kindle, there's a button to move on to the next one. And especially if it's Kindle Unlimited, right? Like I pay for monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. I can read as many books as I want. And so I finish the book, I move on to the next one. Boop, single button, I'm on to the next book, moving on. Whereas like I don't have to wait, a week for the paperback to arrive or something.
Yeah.
Or go to the
Yeah.
store.
It's definitely, I think technology has definitely changed reader mentality in some ways, and that kind of immediacy of the next book is fed into that. I think it's had a huge
Yep.
impact. So what other lessons can you teach me, Sensei, about indie publishing?
Oh gosh, what else? I mean, know your market, right? Like I think one of the things that is cool about traditional publishing is that they can force new things, right? If there's something they're excited about,
Mm,
they can put the marketing dollars behind it to make it exciting for everybody else.
yeah,
Whereas like in the indie world, you are beholden to what readers already want, right? And because you're like beholden to the algorithms that are recommending similar things.
yeah.
And so if you write something that's not similar, it's a hard sell.
So you have to know
And so
where you sit in what category, right down to the
yeah,
last degree.
and that's kind of what I tell people is like what you write definitely like especially like subgenres within any genre makes a huge difference on whether you will be successful or not within indie publishing. Right? Like
Interesting.
if I think a great example of this is one of my friends, Sarah Chorn. So she's a very popular editor,
Hmm.
but she also
Hmm.
writes incredible books. She's got like beautiful prose. She writes weird books, and
Right.
she doesn't sell well, but that's okay because like she's not trying to. But honestly, I think if she was traditionally published, her
Yeah.
books would do very well. But because she's indie published, they don't do as well because
Right.
they don't fit within any of the molds of what the algorithm is going to recommend to people.
Mm.
Whereas like if you put a dragon on your cover, you're immediately going to get like this is like not even a joke, right? Like if you
It's
put a
true.
dragon on your cover, you're going to
True.
sell way more books as an indie author, just
Mm.
period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously like then getting good reviews and things like that will help. But yeah, there are genres that do very well. Dragon Rider fantasy does really well.
Mm.
Romantasy, there's a reason why trad is starting to gobble them up
Oh
because it
yeah.
sells like hotcakes.
Hmm.
Lit RPG, like that one is so interesting because it is purely digital. Right?
Yes.
They're a lot of the lit RPG authors don't even have paperbacks.
Mm.
They just don't even they don't or hardback. They just don't sell physical books, period. And it makes it very hard for publishers to gobble them up because there's less benefit for a lit RPG author to go with a trad publisher because they're like, well, what are you going to give me? I already have my
Yeah.
digital audience, and I don't need you.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's and like progression fantasy, which mixes in with some of the lit RPG stuff. Those kind of
Mm.
things. Just like there are Facebook groups that if you post your new book in it, you're just immediately and you're like write lit RPG or progression fantasy, like you're immediately going to get like dozens of readers or hundreds of readers,
Mm.
and it's the readers that you want to get the algorithm recommending you to the other, books that people finish that are similar. So it's weird. Yeah, I
So
don't.
it sounds like outreach. Obviously, you have to do all the work yourself as indie author, but it sounds like specific outreach is very important to find the right groups of readers rather than just putting it out there and hoping it reaches the right audience.
Yes. And social media does not help that much.
No, same,
there's
same for
there's a lot of
trad.
authors who spend so much time on social media trying to like push their books, and I'm just like, maybe you get a good post and you sell 10 books, but it's like there is no percolation, right, that happens from that, because you're getting random people, and again, like you want the algorithm to get the right 10 people that are going to start getting you working. And so I don't know, TikTok, I guess, is one of the better ones because you can get some more virality with that, but
Mm.
I feel like that happens less with like epic and dark fantasy stuff, and more so with the romance side. Um,
You get weird,
yeah.
weird kind of spectacle ones that take off. Like, what's the recent one? The dragon one that
Oh,
everyone's,
Fourth Wing.
yeah, like that was wasn't
Yeah.
that a TikTok thing? And then it went
Yeah.
gangbusters and it sold through the roof and everywhere, but it
I
started
think
on
I think
TikTok.
they also like put a ton of marketing dollars behind it too, from what I
Mm.
heard.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely one of them.
So what are you writing next? What can you tell us about what's coming next?
Yeah, I'm slowly writing several things. So I do have
Oh, okay.
another short story that I have finished already that's going to go into an anthology this year,
Hmm.
that I think will be announced in a couple of months, that I'm pretty stoked about. Um, and then I have another couple short stories that I'm dabbling on. On the long form stuff, I have 3 books that I'm slowly working on.
Okay.
One of them is for sure an indie book.
Right.
It's my John Wick meets Pokemon book,
Okay. What?
which is absurd. But then if you read like the first couple chapters, you're like, oh, that's exactly what this is. But also like it's great. Um, it's my guilty pleasure book that I'm working on. Just like,
Sure. Why
yeah,
not?
no pressure. Nobody reads it. I don't care. It's fun to write. And then I have one that I think would be a great trad published book, which
Interesting.
is a high fantasy murder mystery book that I'm working on.
Hmm.
And so I will, once I get that done, we'll start. I call it Knives Out with Immortals. And so I think that it's high concept enough that I think it could do well in trad.
Yeah, you got the
And then
pitch down. You got the high concept pitch. They love those things,
right, it's good book club book right there, right? That's
Yeah,
what they love, book club
yeah,
books.
definitely.
And then the third one is the new epic fantasy series. So this one takes a lot of ancient Greek inspiration, but in its own world and its own magic and all kinds of stuff. So that's the one that I'm pretty excited about. It's 2 main characters. They're both married, not to each other. They're both married to separate people. One is a guy, like a retired soldier in his 60s, and then one is a 20-year-old girl who runs a tone reading shop, which is like in-world palm reading.
Oh, okay, right, right.
Everyone in this world, their soul has a tone, and so some people can hear the tone, and she reads them.
Oh,
It's not real.
interesting.
She can't actually read it, but
Oh, she's okay.
she's
I was thinking that's all right. Okay, she's
that's why I said it's like palm reading. It's like, oh yeah,
yeah, sure,
sure,
for sure.
whatever you say.
Hmm.
But it's been fun. I like that one. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for telling us about your journey. I think people get a lot from hearing about the different paths to publication, and that they understand there's so much more than one way to do it, and there's no right way to do it. There's just finding whatever works for you and um what feels right, really, whether it's traditional or self indie publish. It just the different skill sets, I think, and different requirements and time and money for both. So
Yep.
um it's a very different world, and it's constantly evolving. I'm finding things are changing all the time. So
Yep. And it will continue to change all the time on both sides. So you just
yeah,
gotta know your market and where things are at.
absolutely right. You
And
got to
then
go.
get a little lucky.
Yes, luck is definitely a factor. Yeah, on both sides, it does require luck, a lot of skill, but also a lot of luck, and timing is the other thing you can't control. You have to hope that timing works out.
Yeah.
But there you go. Right, you've got to go, and I've got to shoot off as well. So thank you for joining me. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all soon. Good night.
Yeah.